Are going to start here. This is our second online webinar of the summer-fall season, and we're happy to have you here. So here we go. We're going to just go over the agenda a little bit so that you know what to expect, what we're going to go over, and sort of know the flow of things. We'll start by meeting our facilitator and panelists who we have on the line tonight to share their experiences and backgrounds and answer some of your questions. Then we'll go into a little bit of an overview of WorldTeach and our in-country Colombian partner, who is called Volunteers Colombia. And we have two of their co-founders on the line tonight. And then we'll do a brief information about the Colombian education system and present some facts about English education there. And then the bulk of the time tonight will be dedicated to your questions and answers. So we've selected some of the questions that you already submitted when you registered to address, and then we'll also open it up to everyone in case questions have come up to you while you have been listening in, and you have them, and you'll have the opportunity to pose them to the panelists. So let's start then and meet who we have on the line. So this is myself, and I am currently the Director of Communications and Marketing at WorldTeach. I've been with WorldTeach for about 5 years, and I started as a Costa Rica volunteer, and then I have just continued on as the field director in Costa Rica for a couple of years, and then I came to the U.S. and worked as a program manager, and I used to actually manage the Colombia program along with a few other programs. So this is who I am, and hi and welcome. And I'm going to present to you Luis Garcia, who is the co-founder and chairman of the Board of Volunteers Colombia, and he's going to give you a little introduction about himself. Luis?
Thank you, Kara. Very nice to be here tonight. Very glad to meet you all, and hopeful that this information is going to provide you further insights into your upcoming decision of coming to Colombia. As Kara said, I am one of the co-founders of Volunteers Colombia, and I'm currently the chairman of the board. I was born and raised in Bogota, went to law school in Colombia as well, then went to Notre Dame for a program in politics and economics, and completed my Master's of Education at Harvard University. And it was there that WorldTeach, which eventually helped us start the program in the country. Again, very excited to be here.
Thank you, Luis. And next we have Pablo Jaramillo, who is the current executive director and co-founder of Volunteers Colombia. So, Pablo?
Hi, everyone. It's really exciting to be here. Thank you, Kara, for setting this up. As Luis was saying, I'm one of the co-founders of Volunteers Colombia. I will tell you a little bit about our history in a few minutes. My background is mostly from the government. I used to work at the Colombian government. I spent more than 4 years working in different areas of the government. And I think since 2008 that I started to get involved in these education entrepreneurship projects. I just got passionate about it. I did a master's in public administration at Harvard, and last year when I came back to Colombia, I decided to work full-time on this education project. So it's really exciting to be here. I'll tell you more a little bit about myself in a few minutes, and also about the program.
Great, thank you. And next we have Brooke Wallace, who is a current WorldTeach volunteer with us. And Brooke?
Yes. Hi guys, good evening. Speaking to you live from Chía, Colombia, which is right outside of Bogota. I'm from Boston. I did not go to Harvard. I do not have a master's. But yes, from Boston. Have since lived in a few different cities throughout the U.S. I studied journalism and sociology at Emory University down in Atlanta, Georgia. graduated in 2007. Spent a few years working in magazine publishing, but as we all know, that industry is dying. And through the years, had many different jobs, and always wanted to teach, always wanted to travel, always wanted to improve my Spanish. So I finally made it here. For many years, I tried and tried, and it finally happened. So I'm here teaching in Bogota. I'm a co-teacher, teaching high school, and as it says there, I love Spanish, love teaching, love Colombians. They're wonderful people, but I absolutely hate 8th graders and 9th graders, and I'm not afraid to say that. So that's me, and I know you guys are a little nervous. I remember being exactly where you are, pero tranquilos, todo bien, so get excited.
Thank you, Brooke. And then next we have Andres Villamil, who was a student of one of our WorldTeach volunteers. He's pictured there with Kate Bailey, who was his teacher. And Andres, can you introduce yourself a little bit, Karen?
Hi everybody. Good night. Well, my name is Andres Leonardo Villamil Duarte. As you said, Cara, I was a student at Minute School. I was in senior year last year. I was born and raised in Bogota, Colombia. I speak, of course, Spanish and English, and studying French and Italian. Actually, I'm studying political science at the National University of Colombia, and well, that's it.
Great, thank you, Andres. That was wonderful. And then we were hoping to have a Colombian co-teacher on the line, but she wasn't able to make it tonight. So then that brings us to you all, who we have about 55 guests. Not everyone was able to make it, but we had interest from across the U.S. and internationally. We have people joining from here in Massachusetts, to New York City, to Washington, D.C., Portland, Phoenix, Philadelphia, California, Ithaca, New York, which I'm happy to see as I used to study in Ithaca, Tallahassee and Minneapolis, and many, many other places. We also have a few people joining us from Colombia, aside from our panelists, and Argentina and the UK. And I also have, at least we had registered a few WorldTeach Colombia alumni. I'm not sure if they are on the line, if they were able to make it, but a shout out to them. I think I see Kenny and Kate Bailey and Jessica and Jenna Randerson. So thanks for coming and still being involved in WorldTeach. We love to see our alumni participating. And we also have our wonderful Columbia field staff. Right now we have Jessica. I mentioned her name. She's an alumni and she's a field staff. She's the field director right now in Columbia, so she's on the line as well. And we have a few current WorldTeach volunteers, I think. Jonathan, who is down there teaching with us, and then I think he's the only one, Marissa, perhaps. And then a shout out to the future WorldTeach Columbia 2014 cohort members, Katie, Cody, Bailey, Alexandra, Megan, Yala, I don't know how to pronounce your name, but I hope I didn't badger it too much, Rose, Andrea, Kirsten, and Aiden. Thank you for coming if you're on the line. We're happy to see you here, and thank you to everyone else who may not be a part of WorldTeach yet. We're happy to have you on here with us tonight. So moving on to our next topic, we're going to talk a little bit about the two organizations, WorldTeach and Volunteers Columbia. So WorldTeach is an organization that has been around since 1986. We were founded by Harvard students and used to be a Harvard program, and then we became an independently incorporated nonprofit. And we work to educate underserved students and promote global citizenship. So we mobilize college graduates who have a passion to empower underserved students through education and connect them to the places where they can do that and the places who have requested assistance. And through the volunteers' work, we give students the tools they need to gain access to wider career opportunities, whether that's because they've learned English or they've learned some computer skills or math and science. Our volunteers teach different things in all sorts of different countries and across our programs. And then we also are hoping that through the experience, our volunteers become citizens of the world that feel responsible not only to their home country, but also to the global community, and particularly to the community and country that they've lived and worked and served in. So that is WorldTeach in a nutshell. And then we'll move on to Pablo. Will tell you a little bit about Volunteers Colombia.
So I'll let Luis Enrique tell you a little bit about the history, how Luis Enrique was the one who came up with the idea of creating Volunteers Colombia and bringing WorldTeach to our country.
Great.
Okay, so very quickly, before Pablo tells you a little bit about our current structure, Volunteers Colombia emerged as a result of our connection with an island located off the coast of a beautiful city in the Caribbean. That really epitomizes the situation of inequality in the country. You have these beautiful, pristine beaches, and then just it's really the most expensive rural square meter in the country. And then you move a mile inland, and you find the worst conditions of poverty around. And there's been a lot of social programs, but mainly aimed to satisfy basic needs, but not really to empower the community that was in many ways being taken over by tourism. And we thought that a very good way to empower the community to actually participate in a growing economy in the island, mostly because of the inflow of tourism, was by creating a sense of opportunity for the community and for the individuals by empowering the community by teaching English. English in Colombia is a very scarce resource. So we thought if we are able to provide the community with English education, there's a high likelihood that they will be able to participate in this bonanza that is happening. And that's why we thought these would create individual opportunities, but also collective competitiveness. So that was basically the idea that we started, and it came up, it actually started with a very small program with 5 volunteers. And it has grown to our current structure, but I'm going to let Pablo kind of tell you how this initial idea has transformed into what Volunteers Colombia is today.
Yeah, so we started with that. We call it the pilot program, 5 volunteers. That was 2009, and it was an important moment. You know, Colombia was a different country. You know, that 10, 15 years ago, people started to come back to our country, and actually after we brought WorldTeach to the country, I think in 2010. Other programs, you know, like Peace Corps or the Fulbright Fellowships, you know, other programs started to come and bring native speakers as well to the country. So we were sort of we call the pioneers who this happened with WorldTeach. What happened in 2010 is that other schools, I mean, we started focus on Baru, on that island. But after people realized we were bringing native speakers as English teachers, other schools, universities, local governments, they started reaching out to us, and they were saying, we want to have volunteers, we want to have WorldTeach people here at our schools. So we opened new programs. If you see the slide, you know, by 2010 we already were in Barranquilla, Sales, Vaya, those are, I mean, Barranquilla is in the Caribbean coast, the other cities are in the coffee growing region, and we realized that the need was huge, not only in Baru, in Cartagena, but throughout the country. So we started to partner with local governments, universities, schools, and then, I mean, over the last 5 years, we have brought more than 100 volunteers, 150 volunteers to the country. Very few, I mean, important things. We have partnered with public and private organizations, but all of them serve underprivileged communities and kids or students. So that's one of the important things for us. For 2014, I mean, this year, 2013, we have our biggest cohort of teachers, of volunteers. more than 50. And for 2014, we have a huge goal. We want to bring 200 volunteers in partnership with the Colombian government, with the Ministry of Education, and with SENA, which is a vocational training agency of the country. And there will be plenty of opportunities here. Schools, public schools, private schools, but we also have placements at universities. For those of you interested in higher ed, you will find great placements. Finally, we have our program in different regions of the country. So Brooke, she's here in next to Bogota, which is in the center of the country. Other volunteers are placed in what we call the hotland, or next to the coast. Others will go to the coffee growing region. So this is just a very short, like picture of our program, where we come from and where we're headed to. I don't care if we have more time, or should we just keep going and then go back to the research?
Yeah, you have a few minutes if you want, or we can keep going.
Okay. It's something important. We as Volunteers Colombia, our main partner has been WorldTeach. And we have partnered with WorldTeach basically because being an English teacher is very challenging. And it's very demanding, and it's not an easy task, right? So we rely on WorldTeach to look for very talented and committed people like you guys. It's not easy to be a teacher. I'm sure Brooke will tell you a little bit about that, but it's not a part-time job in which you come to the country and teach English for a few hours a week. This is very demanding and challenging, and that's why we partner initially with WorldTeach to have that quality assured on our program. What we do on our side is that we look for placements. So I go and pitch the program to local government schools in regions or areas in which we see the need for this program. And once we find a potential partner, then we do a vetting process with WorldTeach, and we go and we visit the schools, we visit the universities, we visit the neighborhoods, we look at potential neighborhoods for housing, how the commute will be, and then we ask officially WorldTeach, okay, please go and recruit an X number of volunteers for next year's program. So we, Volunteers Colombia, we provide all that logistical support previous to the program, and then throughout the year we also help a lot by following up on each of the programs. So we make sure each of our volunteers is having a great experience, and whenever we find differences, misunderstandings, between the volunteers and the principals or their coordinators, then we go and make sure that everything is all set. In terms of the partnership with the government, Luis and I were very passionate about government and about public policies. And in the end, one of our biggest goals, this program, is to influence public policies and to help the public officials improve the programs and the policies of the country. Since we started Volunteers Colombia, again, that was 2009, we got the support from the Ministry of Education, but it was only an institutional support. 5 years into our program, a bit easier, we finally got to partner directly with them. So recently, 2 months ago, we started a program with the Ministry of Education itself, in which we bring volunteers to escuelas normales. And escuelas normales are like the education schools that train primary teachers in Colombia. So the hypothesis behind it is that we can go straight to the root of the problem, which is the education schools don't train the teachers as they're supposed to. We're finally tackling one of the core problems of English in Colombia, which is Colombian English teachers don't speak English, and they go to ed school and then they graduate from ed school without speaking English well, and then they need to go to a classroom in primary or secondary and they need to teach English. So what we're achieving with WorldTeach after like 5 years of this program is to finally go to the root of this problem, finally partner with the Ministry of Education, and hopefully start helping the future primary teachers of the country improve their proficiency of English. On the other hand, in this program with SENA, which is the vocational training agency of the government, they do similar things to what community colleges do in the States. We're helping underprivileged people like increase or raise their opportunities to get a job. No, it's that simple. If those underprivileged Colombians can enhance their proficiency in English, the likelihood that they can get a job increases, I don't know, 80 or 90%. And if they get a job, by speaking English, that means they can probably overcome poverty and take all their family out of poverty. So again, this is just to show you, we as Volunteers Colombia, we don't want to bring volunteers because it's fun. Of course, we like, both of us, we were educated in the States, and we love a lot of things from our country. We love having foreigners here in Colombia, but there are deep reasons for bringing volunteers. Again, we want to transform the system. We want to help the kids, the underprivileged kids, improve their English and that way get more opportunities in life. We want to help the Colombian English teachers improve their proficiency. And we also want to help like Colombians, we call them young workers, to increase the likelihood of getting a job, by developing the skills of speaking English.
Great, excellent. Thank you so much for that thorough background. So we will continue on from here and move into our section about English education in Colombia. So we'll have Louis tell us a little bit about the basic structure of the education system. It might be a little bit different from the education system you're used to, but Louis?
Sure, Kara, thank you.
Thanks.
So yeah, as you can see in the slide, there's a difference between the responsibility at a national level and the responsibility at a regional level in Colombia. And that's one of the key things to understand, because the Ministry of Education essentially draws educational policies, but the actual responsible for the delivery of the education are the regions. And these regions are either departments, the equivalent of states, or municipalities, or the equivalent of cities. Currently, there are 94 secretaries of education, and there is a huge variation as to the quality within these secretaries of education, the level of resources devoted to education, and the size, of course. We have been lucky to partner with some wonderful secretaries of education throughout our history, and that is a key component of the program. These tend to be secretaries of education that are relatively well governed, with a drive to improve quality and to offer additional opportunities, and also to invest additional resources in education. This does not mean that the quality is high. Colombia in general has a very low quality of education, as measured by international standardized tests. But still, it's an interesting process, these of working with the public sector. There are 3 levels. There are 11 grades of basic education, which are essentially grade 0 to 11. There is the same number of schooling as in the U.S. Although the U.S. goes to 12th grade and Colombia ends in 11th grade, it does not mean that there's less years of schooling. It's just that the grade that is equivalent to grade 1 in the U.S. in Colombia is called grade 0, which strictly speaking corresponds to a year of preschool. Then grades 1 through 5th are primary education, and then grades 6 through 9 are middle school, which in Colombia is actually not called middle school. It's called basic secondary school. And then you have the equivalent of high school in Colombia, which is grades 10 and 11. And you will see for some of you as volunteers that there are different categories of high school. Some of the high schools are technical and vocational high schools, which are trying to prepare the students to get directly into the workforce during grades 10 and 11. So that is a key point for some of you. It is also important to mention that throughout the country, the most common structure is K through 12 schools. Unlike the U.S., where there's a very, very common structure of primary schools, middle schools, and high schools, in Colombia, most schools are K through 12. So that's a very important information. One additional thing that is important to note is higher education, because some of the volunteers will be at the higher education level. There's also two basic modalities of higher education in Colombia. One being professional degrees that are the common 4 or 5 year degrees. In fact, most of the professional degrees in Colombia are 5 years. And then there are technical and vocational schools that typically range from 1 to 2 years. And unlike basic education, primary and secondary education, where there's a very, very high rate of enrollment, higher education has a very, very low access. So only about 40% access, whereas in primary and secondary education is 100%. There are two school calendars. The calendar A is the most common one, and it runs from late January to December. Most public schools belong to these called calendar A. I would say 90% of the schools in the country are calendar A. And then there's what's called calendar B, running from August to June. And typically calendar B schools are those private elite schools are typically running on these calendar B. Most volunteers teach in calendar A. There are public schools which account for most of the coverage in the country, but then there are for-profit and non-for-profit private schools. This is only true for K-12. In tertiary education or higher education, all schools, public or private, need to be have to be not-for-profit. So that is important. And there is a variety of schools in terms of the private structure. You will see private schools that are nonetheless serving underprivileged students, and that is the case for several of our volunteers. We'll be working with either charter schools or analogous schools that are serving underprivileged population, sometimes with government funding, sometimes with private funding, but keeping their private nature. And also there are the typical public schools, which we also partner with. So that is kind of a very basic snapshot. One other last thing that I would add is just simply the fact that the quality in general is very low. The most important international standardized test that is called PISA, run by the OECD, Colombia typically ranks in the bottom performers, below average in all the categories. So it is by most standards a low quality system, and that is a challenge. It's definitely a challenge. And finally, in terms of funding, just so you have an idea, the government, the public sector, invests roughly $500 to $600 per student per year. So, and that's the total investment in education per student. So per pupil expenditures are very low, and those $500 are enough, are the total that is invested in the education of a student. Some secretaries of education will invest more. Bogota, for example, invests about twice as much. But it's small resources that are flowing into education.
Excellent, thank you. And then a little bit about the English education specifically in Colombia. Luis, can you
Sure.
give us background?
English education is supposed to be a mandatory subject. So all students are supposed to take English classes when they're K-12 education. However, the reality is that the quality of these English teaching is very low. What you will find, which is a very complex situation, is that only 9% of the teachers, of the English teachers, not of the teachers, of the English teachers, the way I say it is always very bluntly, but only 9% of the English teachers actually speak English. So that means that what you will see when you walk into an English class throughout the country is an English teacher that is teaching English by speaking Spanish. So that's why students will go through 11 years of English instruction and graduate with a level of proficiency that is close to zero. So a huge bottleneck for English education is the quality of the teachers. And that is why the model of volunteering has such a high relevance for the country. Sometimes volunteers are struggling with the idea that if they come to Colombia, they will be taking away jobs from Colombian teachers that could be teaching English instead of them. But that is really not the case, simply because there aren't enough teachers to cover for all the needs. So that is a very important piece of information for all of you to know. The Colombian system uses the Common European Framework of Reference, which is an international framework that measures foreign languages in general, not just English. And it is a very interesting standard. It is good in the sense that it provides some very specific benchmarks. And the idea is that the students are going to achieve a level that is the B1 level, which is a pre-intermediate, and it's supposed to be the goal for all students. However, not even 10% of the students reach these B1 pre-intermediate level. So that all of you know, studies have shown that in order for a student to reach a particular level in the common framework of reference, their teacher needs one level above that. So that means if we wanted our students to be at a B1 level, that means all of their teachers need to be at least a B2 level, which is not that high, it's an intermediate level. However, as I just mentioned, only about 9% of the teachers, English teachers in Colombia, are at the B2 level. So that really explains why few students are getting to the desired B1 level. Volunteers or native speakers also gain a huge relevance here simply because their level is a C2, of course, which is a native level. So their ability to really drive progress in the students is very high, simply because their own proficiency is very high. So your goal as volunteers is basically contributing to raising that level, and what we've seen in our volunteers in the past is that they can really accelerate the process for the teachers in trying to get to this point where they will graduate from high school at a B1 pre-intermediate level.
Great, excellent. So interesting. So now moving on to our probably the most interesting part of this evening are the questions and answers. So like I mentioned, we have a few pre-selected questions that we took from ones that you all submitted that we're going to address, and then we'll open it up to everyone to pose your questions to the panelists if you have one that you'd like to be addressed. And so while we go through the questions, we do have some photos in the background, and they're all taken throughout the years by WorldTeach Colombia volunteers. And I tried to put in a good variety there for you of pictures of host families and volunteers and schools and students and Colombian scenery to give you a sense of the diversity of Colombia and the experiences that can be had there. You'll see quite a range of things. So let's get started with the questions. And again, if you want to chat questions into me, I'm on the line to help and can answer you as we go. So starting with our first question, and I'm going to pose this question to Pablo. We talked about this a little bit, but when do kids typically begin learning English in school, and how intensive is it throughout their schooling?
Yeah, I think Luis already talked a little bit about this. In some schools, kids start to learn English in kindergarten, you know, or in this grade 0 that we have. That varies a little bit across regions and schools, but basically, I would say at least in the first grade, all of the Colombian students are taking English classes. Again, it varies across schools, but usually they get 2 or 3 hours a week of English. And then in secondary, you know, 6th to 11th grade, they get probably 4 hours of English. Now, in the primary teachers are not English teachers. They need to teach all the different subjects. You know? So they are not even English teachers. They're just primary teachers who then take a book and teach English. In secondary, we do have English teachers. I mean, they go to ed schools and they become English teachers, and they're certified English teachers. But as we've already explained, they don't really speak English fluently. So I think again one of the sad things is that kids do have 3 or 4 hours of English every week. They just don't learn in an appropriate way. And one thing that I would tell about that is that probably the thing that we lack the most, I mean as Colombians or in the education system, is the speaking component. If you ask Colombians or if you ask these Colombian English teachers, yeah, they teach grammar and they teach how to write, not perfectly, but they do. But I think where the biggest problem is in the speaking component. You know, so whenever a student, if you go to a school, a student who has had 4 years of English, and you say, "Hey, hello, how are you?" Nobody speaks or answers in English. That's the tragedy. So that's also why we love this model. We do believe that volunteers are not teachers. They can add a lot of value since primary just by enhancing this immersion into English and speaking, so that the students get rid of their fear of speaking in English.
Great, excellent. And our next question is for Louise. How has the education system changed in the past few years, and what are Colombia's current goals concerning English education?
Sure, thanks, Kara. I think the main shift over the past few years in Colombian education has been a shift from access into quality. During many decades, the biggest challenge was to actually get to the very last child and make sure that all the kids were offered the opportunity to actually be in school and be enrolled in school. And that took huge efforts, some of which are still in place. For example, you will see that many schools have a double shift. Students going to the school either in the morning or in the afternoon in an effort to make sure that there is a slot for every kid. So access was a huge challenge for many years. Dropouts continue to be a challenge, especially during higher education. Particularly underprivileged students have a huge opportunity cost to stay in school. So there is a significant rate of dropouts during the later years of education. So that is still a challenge for public education primarily. But now, again, after the issue of access has been, in a way, tackled, there's been a huge change into quality. The country has agreed to participate, as I mentioned earlier, in international standardized tests, which is something that definitely helps the country in terms of benchmarking, comparing itself to other countries in the region and across the world. And right now, most of the efforts from the central government are being placed in strengthening the teacher profession, strengthening the leaders of the schools, that's the principals, also bolstering the education in general by including educational technologies. Substantial efforts are being placed in getting tablets and technology to the students. So again, huge shift from access into quality. And in terms of English education, I think I mentioned it earlier. Right now, the main goal is to make sure that students get to that B1 level by the time they finish high school. I would say progress in these areas has been very, very slow. Many strategies have been implemented, but few have been successful. And again, the main bottleneck being the lack of qualified English teachers So every additional teacher that has the proficiency and the talent and preparation to teach is definitely going to contribute a lot in making sure that these goals achieved.
Great, excellent. So now we're going to move on to Brooke, who is currently teaching there. How receptive are students to English classes? Is there a passion to learn English?
I think the question should be, how receptive are any students to learn anything? I think we all know that teaching is difficult, even if we've never taught before. As students, we know that you don't always want to learn, and the teachers don't always want to teach. So it doesn't matter that I'm a foreigner teaching a second language. It doesn't matter that if they're in primary or if they're in bachillerato, it doesn't matter if they're in university. The reality is that students are not always receptive. It's wonderful when you have passionate students about English because they come up to you and they're just like in awe of the words that come out of your mouth. That's wonderful, but the reality is that not every student is like that. I think that there's definitely a passion for languages here that might not exist in the U.S., for example, because, look, I mean, North Americans speak English, and English, and English, and that's it. But here, everybody listens to music in English. People watch television shows in English. I mean, I have a student who loves Friends, and she tells me Phoebe is hilarious. And I know that she's watching it in English. She's not even watching it in Spanish. So, yes, I think that there's definitely an interest and a realization that they know that English will help them. They know that it will help them get jobs. It will improve their quality of life, perhaps. Of course, it's not the answer to the world's success, but they know that it will help them. I think there's even a joke in Spanish, and you guys can maybe help me. It's something, I don't remember it. It's something like about English opening doors. No, I don't remember it. Never mind. Anyways, but I'm sorry. No, I anyways have been very fortunate with my students. They've been interested in my role here. They've been receptive to learning and speaking with me, which is all I can ask for. And yes, all of those students will sometimes be terrible and won't want to learn, just like any class that you're in, and that means that you have to step up your game and be a teacher and be creative, just like any other teacher.
Definitely. Great perspective on that. And then hearing from the other side, from a student, Andres, I know that your English level is very good from our conversations, and you were very interested in English. So why were you so interested in learning English?
Well, first, answering the two questions, how receptive are students and is there a passion to learn English? Well, for receptive, I mean, depends. Because, as Brooke said, first graders are not interested in that because they don't know, what's that and, what can mean, and I know why she hates 8th graders and 9th graders because there's, a kind of changing the mood and there's some kind of evolution, teenage years, so, I understand her. So receptive, I mean, the person that, knows about the opportunities that you can have, of course, they're really receptive, but, depends on the grade and the community you're asking. The passion, well, I will put my example when I first started private lessons because that's the problem. I had, from the first grade, I had classes, English lessons, sorry, but in the school. But it was like colors, hi, how are you, good morning, and all the year was that. I mean, blue, yellow, and songs about it, and it's real interesting because, you know, you have to put material to the kids. But when I started in first grade in that private lessons, I was first of all the youngest one, and I was the less interested in that years because I didn't know what was going on. And I have to say, there's a problem in the passion and in the interest of the students because they don't know and they have no vision of the future. They don't understand it could be an opportunity. For example, right now, I'm doing some kind of activities and being a translator at the International Affairs Committee at my university, and I'm the only one that can do that. I'm the only student. So, I mean, that's an amazing opportunity, and I'm working with people in the UK, in the United States. It's amazing. So, and it's not only just a job. It's experience, it's enjoying, it's understanding, it's having a good time, and I think that's the point of view I have of these two questions.
Great, thank you so much. And we just have one other question coming your way real quick. What was your favorite part about having a WorldTeach volunteer English teacher? Here you are.
Oh, yes. I think the problem that Pablo said, I think, is that these teachers, the Colombians are like, you know, this kind of Sofia Vergara's accent, and it's boring because you only hear that. So when these people come into the room and start to speak, you're interested because it's not normal to have that kind of experience. So I think they changed the vision that I have of speaking English, and I have the opportunity to just speak to these people and being more interested than, you know, ever before. You know, as you can see in this picture, it was the first spelling bee. It was created and organized by Bridget Carey and supported, of course, with other teachers like Kay Bailey and Tash Miley. There's the two blondes and the green sweater girl. I won. It was an amazing experience, and everybody was focused on. But I think that was an amazing strategy to have more interest in other students because they wanted to be there, they wanted to compete, they wanted to do something else because it's boring to have these 2 hours in a classroom saying good morning or, you know, only just studying grammar. And you know, this experience was amazing, I have to say, and thank God you're here. Yes.
Perfect. And so we're actually going to take a question from the audience right now that is sort of on the opposite side when you don't have wonderful students like Andres. And so I'm going to have, this is coming from Alexandra, and I'm just going to turn Alexandra's microphone on so she can ask the question. Alexandra?
Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Good. I'm speaking from Boston, Massachusetts. And my question is, what do you do when you encounter students who see no need to learn English?
So maybe Brooke can chime in there.
Okay, very good question. And I'm thinking of the answer. Okay, yesterday in my class, which was originally, let's say, 25 students, a lovely, nice class of 25 seventh graders. That class then became 40 kids because one of the teachers, actually Lena, who was going to speak with us, Lena has since taken a job with a university, so we are now filling her position. So 3 classes became 2 classes. So, okay, you have a class of 25 kids, including some that don't have any interest in English. Then you have a class of 40 kids who some don't have an interest in English. The reality is that you have a class of students. Again, like I said before, you're always going to have kids who aren't interested, who don't like the subject, and who don't want to be there. And think about your own studies and your own interests. For me personally, I hate science. I liked to try my best, but I was just terrible at science. There are many students who struggle with languages, as I think we all personally are struggling with maybe improving our own Spanish or a third language or whatever. So yes, the reality is you will have students who don't like English. You will even have teachers here who are, they're my friends, but they are my coworkers, Colombians, who say, you Americans, you guys think that English owns the world, that everyone needs to speak English, blah, blah, blah. And unfortunately, that is a common idea because, look, I mean, these programs exist in the world that we're teaching English to people all over the world. Soon that might change. Maybe it will become Mandarin. But yes, the reality is English will help people. Do I want to force my language on someone? Absolutely not. So if those students don't want to learn, unfortunately, they might fail the class. That's their problem. I will teach and teach and teach, and I will answer as many questions as possible. But at the end of the day, the reality is you cannot change a person's attitude. You can try very hard, and I make my classes as dynamic as possible, and I tell the kids all the time, I'm like, I understand you. I can relate with you because I struggle with Spanish every single day. There are school subjects that I also hate, just like you guys. So that's fine if you don't like English. I'm not going to force it down your throat, but I'm going to teach it to you, and as a student, you must listen to me. Unfortunately, there are rules of the school, right, that they cannot change, that I cannot change. I'm only there to help them, but of course not everybody is going to listen. That's the reality.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Alexandra.
Kara,
Yes?
Kara, can you let me jump in very quickly?
Sure, of course.
I think another reason why we think the WorldTeach report is important is because of that. Since our volunteers are not teachers, of course, one of their biggest challenges is classroom management, especially when you face and when you have kids who are not interested in learning English. So I think, I mean, first all the training and the orientation that WorldTeach gives to the volunteers is very helpful. I mean, I don't know what you, Brooke, think, but I think most of our volunteers have always said they really, really lack the orientation, and it was really helpful to face those kind of challenges. But also,
Absolutely.
once you start teaching, each of our volunteers, I mean, each volunteer has a field director, an assistant field director, who actually checks in every week and sees how things are going. Things related to the classroom, again, in this case, volunteers who say, I'm frustrated. My kids just don't want to learn English. They don't pay attention to me. I just come up with new activities and nobody cares. So it's really important, you know, that the WorldTeach, the role, you know, that the WorldTeach staff does here in Colombia. So they go, they visit the school. I do that myself as well, you know, but the field directors, I think they have that goal of helping the volunteers face those kind of challenges. Sometimes that requires like pivoting the strategies and come up with different activities. Sometimes that requires confronting the students. Sometimes that requires asking for help, you know, to a Colombian teacher. Sometimes volunteers say, I need a Colombian teacher on my side, you know, somebody who helps me get these kids engaged, you know, involved. So I think most of our volunteers face that kind of challenge at some point. but we also work really hard, especially in WorldTeach, to make sure the volunteers have the support to overcome those challenges.
I would completely agree. The support is absolutely there. We have many opportunities. We have WorldTeach, we have Volunteers Colombia, we have people in the schools to help us. We have our Colombian co-teachers or just our Colombian colleagues. And I hate to say it, but sometimes I speak to the kids, whether it's in the classroom or outside of the classroom, in Spanish, and I talk to them as people, as person to person, not always as teacher to student. And of course, you know, that my goal is to speak English with them, but sometimes I want them to understand that I am here to communicate with them, not to work against them. And I think that's just the role of any teacher. But yes, I'm definitely not a teacher, so I'm learning as I go.
Excellent. And then we have another question. So I realize that we're approaching 9 o'clock and the end of the online event. We'll take a few more questions in case anyone wants to stay on the line, because we have a lot of excellent questions coming in, and we had a lot of excellent questions when you guys registered. So I understand that you are all busy and you might have to get off, and we will record, we are recording this right now, so you'll be able to see it later. But we are just going to take a few more questions since there's some great ones coming through. So this next one comes from Shannon McKinney, and she asks, what is the typical attitude of Colombians towards foreign volunteers? Are the volunteers considered allies or intruders? So perhaps, yeah, Brooke and...
Yeah, I would love to comment. That's a great question. I'm pretty sure this person, Shannon, that asked the question has never been to Colombia, because if she's been here, she would know that Colombians are some of the most kind, welcoming people in the entire world. And I can say that absolutely with 100% confidence. And I don't know one foreigner in this country that would not agree with me. I have been welcomed into a wonderful, wonderful community in my school and outside of the school. Of course, like it was mentioned earlier, we don't want to think, as volunteers, we don't want to take jobs away from other people, but the reality is we're not taking anyone's job. I've helped so many people while I've been here, and since day one in orientation, the people that hosted us in the finca where we had our orientation, the bus driver, the people that helped us in the immigration office, every single person has thanked us. People who don't know my name, people who I don't know their name, people have thanked us for being here, simply for being here and for helping them and for working with them. So we are absolutely welcome and definitely not intruders. I would say, I mean, there were so many volunteers from last year's program that stayed, and now it's almost like they expect us to stay because they know that we love their country so much, and that gives them so much pride, and it's something that we can share because now all the volunteers love Colombia as well.
Excellent. Luis or Pablo, do you have anything as Colombians yourself, or Andres, definitely to contribute towards that about the perception of volunteers in Colombia?
Sorry, Kara, so I didn't understand all the question. So the perception about volunteering in Colombia?
The perception of volunteers, foreign volunteers who are in Colombia, being a Colombian yourself, speaking from that perspective.
Okay, so I would say two things. First is that one of the reasons why we chose our name in English, I mean, we're called Volunteers Colombia, not Voluntarios Colombia. Of course, we have the translation, but we had a reason, which is we truly believe in the volunteering mindset, idea, culture of the United States. We don't have that in Colombia. I mean, most of the Americans, at least the ones that I know, they volunteer at some point of their lives. Whether at high school, serving at their church or the local hospital, or in summer camp, whatever. I think one of the key values embedded in the American culture is volunteering, serving. We don't have that much in Colombia. Of course, we do, and a lot of Colombians serve a lot, but we wanted to bring that value to Colombia. So for a lot of people, to be a volunteer is something I would say strange or uncommon. They're not familiar with it, you know. But of course they welcome it, and once they hear about a foreigner who is volunteering in Colombia, as Brooke is saying, they're very like friendly with them. Now at the schools, and this is very important, people will treat you like regular teachers. You know, they know volunteers are here, and they know we bring volunteers, but in terms of the expectations, the I don't know, the how do you say that, the workload, the responsibilities, you know, in most of the schools, you will be treated as regular teachers. You will have the same workload as Colombian teachers. And I think I've seen a lot of volunteers struggle with that, because they sort of expect their principals or coordinators to treat them differently. You know, for instance, they say, oh, I want to take 2 weeks off and go, I don't know, hiking. And at the schools they say, no, we know you're a volunteer, but being a volunteer implies a lot of responsibilities as well, you know? So it's important that you guys understand people will know you're volunteers, but they will probably treat you as another teacher, you know, in terms of responsibilities and challenges.
One thing that I would add to all of you, I don't think we should underestimate culture shock, which I think it's also a fascinating thing about international experiences in general. And there are some nuances about the Colombian culture that it will take a while to understand. I think we've created, actually not us, but the volunteers that have been here for the past 5 years have created a wonderful knowledge base about these small nuances about the culture. But some of them sound incredibly trivial and are very important. One thing that it's an incredible thing about differences in culture, for example, for a Colombian is incredibly offensive if you slam the car doors. And these sound so small, and yet it is something that shows how different our cultures are. Most Americans will slam the door of the car by Colombian standards, and Colombians will get outraged if that happens. If you're in a cab and you slam the door, the cab driver is going to be offended. And I'm not trying to provide a tip with these. I'm just trying to show how fascinating it is when you go to a culture and small things that you never heard of before become a part of your life. So I think getting to the country involves having an open mind about definitely getting into a different culture, which will be challenging. Work-wise, it will be a challenge. You will see that Colombians are not as stringent about schedules, deadlines, etc., as you would expect them to be in the U.S. And adapting to that and understanding that is always going to be a very nice balance between being an island of excellence and bringing what's best about the American culture, but also respecting and understanding Colombian culture and just a different way of viewing the world. So I think that is, in my opinion, one of the most fascinating parts of the experience of a volunteer is getting these ability to read a different culture, and I think that is going to endow you with a wonderful, wonderful set of skills for the rest of your lives.
Wow, excellent. Really powerful answer. And Andres is just going to comment real quickly as well on this.
Oh, yeah, so, well, you know, when I met some of the volunteers, I didn't, you know, I thought they, you know, they were professionals, teachers, were, you know, well paid. It was kind of vacation thing. But when they, you know, they told me that, you know, they saved money, you know, and as Pablo or Luis said, you know, it's really a sacrifice and some kind of difficult thing to get to another culture, to know another people, to not to speak Spanish with people around you, and that's, I think, it made more special, a kind of challenging thing, and I think that's really appreciated and changed the whole vision of me and the students that we know. It was a kind of sacrifice, I think.
Wonderful. Thank you. And so we are just going to wrap up with one last question, and we're going to bring Jessica, who is our field director. I'm going to bring her on the line, unmute her, and Brooke, who is on the line, to address this next question. So what pre-departure steps can a future WorldTeach volunteer take to ensure a successful term in Colombia?
Well, first, hi everybody, and thank you for coming. Brooke, I'll say one thing, and then I'd love for you to comment as well. I would say throw all of your expectations out the window. I mean, about your students, about teaching, the other volunteers, your living situation, communicating in Spanish, just every expectation you have, let it go. Let the experience, the placements, your students, your school, the country, let that be your guide. We found that that sort of outlook really lends itself tremendously to creating the most impact. You're going to have more of an impact at your school, on your students, and the experience will have more of an impact on you if you walk in with a completely open mind. So I would say that is going to be the most important thing in terms of preparing yourself for arriving in Colombia.
Awesome. And Brooke, what would you say?
Yeah, that's a great idea that I definitely agree with, Jess. I would say you can rest assured that the fear and the concern and the worries and the preocupaciones, that everything that's in your mind while you're sitting comfortably in the U.S. or in Canada or in Britain or wherever, that all of that is the worst that it will get. For me personally, I thought that getting on that plane was the most difficult of the entire process. Once you arrive, boom, that's it. Everything is easier. You have a support system, you have a plan, you have a city, you have a home. Everything is literally done for you. Of course it's hard. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think the worst, or the most difficult is the mental over preparation that you're struggling with in your homes, in your minds right now. So just rest assured that it only gets easier from there. And I really would read very thoroughly that entire list that WorldTeach gives you, because seriously, I mean, there are some really good ideas on there, and I cannot tell you how many people were missing things or had forgotten things at orientation, and yeah, that list really helps.
Excellent. I fully endorse that last comment as well. We field staff and the U.S. office definitely takes a lot of time to put that information together for our volunteers to be prepared. And yeah, I would say learning as much as you can about Colombia, and if you have time to brush up on your Spanish a little bit, that helps if you really want to be, actively doing something to prepare yourself. If you don't do it, you'll still be fine in Colombia, but if you do have background knowledge about the history and current events of Colombia, that will definitely inform your experiences when you first arrived there. I found that was helpful for me. I wasn't in Colombia, but I was in Costa Rica, and so that's just something to take there. And so for now, we're going to wrap up this session, this event, and hopefully we'll be able to answer some of the questions that we didn't answer right now tonight through email in the following days. And I want to thank everybody for coming. We definitely love having ways to connect with our future and current and past volunteers and other people who are new to WorldTeach. So thank you very much for coming. And this is, I'm going to end on this picture right here. And I'm just going to quickly tell you about this. This is our volunteers in January. And right there in the center in the blue tie standing up, that is the President Santos from Colombia. He met with all of the volunteers upon arrival, which was a very exciting moment for the program and for the volunteers. And we're very thankful that it's such a success down there in Colombia. And I want to take a minute to thank Pablo and Luis and Brooke and Jessica and Andres. It's amazing to have you guys here to help out and give your perspective and wisdom. And we're very thankful that you guys took time out of your busy lives to join us here, and for everyone who joined us. So thank you and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Kara.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kara.
Absolutely. Good night.
We look forward to seeing you all here in Colombia in January.
Exactly. Colombia 2014. Okay, thanks again and good night.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Good night.